June Book Club for Winipek by Niigaan Sinclair. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Erin Lebar. I'm an audience engagement manager at the Free Press and your book club administrator. Tonight, I'm joined by Free Press columnist Jen Zoratti, McNally Robinson co-owner Chris Hall, and of course, our featured author slash Free Press columnist slash Free Press newsletter writer slash Free Press podcast co-host, Niigaan Sinclair.
When maybe I should find another job.
Yeah, I don't think you're busy enough. I don't think you have enough going on. And Niigaan is joining us from Calgary, so we want to thank him especially for making time to pop into book club tonight. Um, McNally Robinson and the Winnipeg Free Press are located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota people, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. Before we move on, we actually had a question, Niigaan, about land acknowledgements, and I was wondering if you might be able to offer some insight here. This reader is wondering, how can we as individuals properly create an inclusive land acknowledgement for Indigenous peoples, and where is the best place to have someone confirm that we've done it correctly?
Well, first of all, don't be afraid to make a mistake, because we all are learning and we're all going through a process in which we're trying to understand these things that we've never done before. And for many of us, these are, we've been taught not to see Indigenous people. And that was through our different experiences in school, in our textbooks, in our different lessons that we've learned throughout society, in movies, for example. And so I just say, first off, writing one, saying one, being sincere about it is already the first step. You've already accomplished a big goal. But the second is that there's lots of wonderful templates that you can use from organizations all across the city, from all across the province. But you can do some of your own research too. There's a great website called nativeland.ca, which will tell you all the different nations that are includes the Blackfoot, includes the historical Métis Nation of Alberta. It includes, which is a little not quite different than the Red River Métis, because they're descendants of the Red River Métis, but they have land claims out here which are very different. And then, of course, all the different Cree people out here. There's, lots of different other nations that come make up, and even ones that we are oftentimes are just learning for the very first time. Like, for example, in Manitoba. You might not know, but the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota people, also called the Assiniboine people, traditional homelands was at what's now called the Forks, or the Upper Fort Garry, or sorry, the Fort Garry Hotel. And so that's where the land claim now is. And I won't get into all of that, but I'll just say that you can learn more all the time about whose traditional territory that you're on. Just there's lots of research now, and there's people who write about it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I put the URL nativeland.ca in the chat for people who are interested in doing some of their own research. Meeting will run as it always does. I'm going to throw to Chris Hall in just a second to do an introduction of the book and of Niigaan, and then Niigaan's going to do a reading, and then we'll start with the Q&A from all of your lovely reader questions. We got a lot of questions this month, so we're going to do our best to incorporate as many as we can. With that, I will throw to Chris.
Thank you, Erin. Good evening, everybody. Just a few words to introduce a man who likely needs no introduction with this audience. If you read the Free Press regularly, then you know he writes regular column there, among other things, as has already been said. And if you read it regularly, like I do, then you've already learned a lot from him. Winipek, Visions of Canada from an Indigenous Center, is a collection of those columns written about a place he calls Ground Zero of reconciliation in Canada. As the back jacket says, this is a book that demands change and celebrates those struggling for it, that reminds us of what must be reconciled and holds accountable those who must do the work. It's a book that pulses with the power that comes from loving a place, even as that place is violently taken away from you, and the magic of finding your way back to it. We could have a conversation about every chapter in the book, so it's hard to decide where to focus. And that feels analogous to how many challenges we face as a group. So much work yet to be done, but there's no better guide to keep us up to date with our progress and calling us out on our lack thereof than Niigaan Sinclair. And what an amazing opportunity to learn more from him in this conversation tonight. I should also say that he's one of the busiest people I know. He's somewhere in Calgary, as we've said. I would say he's the busiest, except I also know David Robertson, so they're kind of neck and neck. So I will turn it over to Niigaan while he has some time and have him get us started with a short reading.
Okay, so miigwech everybody. So bonjour and magraduk Niigaan Wewaram Dindish cost Namago Shindo Dim. Even when Momayayan, it's nice to be here. Thanks so much for engaging in the book. And I apologize, my internet's a little bit glitchy on my phone. So I had to switch from the convention center that I'm in right now. I'm at the Rotary International Conference. Some of you may or may not know, but I was a Rotary Exchange student many, many years ago in 1993. I went to South Africa to watch the Mandela election, which really formed the basis for a lot of my understanding of race and identity and nationhood, and watching the birth of democracy in South Africa, and then coming back to Canada and seeing all the different forms of reconciliation. So that's really, I have a long-standing relationship with Rotary, and so I've spoken today. I just finished a session about an hour and a half ago. I'm going to be doing a reading tonight from Winipek, and two things to remember about Winipek as we talk for this evening. The first is that Winipek is not about the city, it's about the watershed, even though the cover of the book will confuse you. And remember that the cover, as an author, you don't always have say in totally all the things that go into. Jamie Isaac, who is is a good friend of mine, who's an artist, if you know her, is from Saging, Anishinaabe, Kwe. She's the one that suggested to have the highlighting of the rivers to make sure that we remind ourselves that Winipek's about the water. And so that's what that word Winipek means, is referring to the algae. And the second thing to understand is that all of these pieces come from different columns that I've written for the Free Press. So I wouldn't be here without my amazing colleagues like Erin and Jen, who constantly make me look better than I really am. So thanks to that, and thanks to Chris for the great work that McNally does. McNally saves lives, like literally, like those of it gives us inspiration and gives us a model that all of us as artists work towards, and it's a real home base for us. Anyways, the reading I'm going to tell you for tonight is the piece on page 269 in the book. It's my talk about the statues. Everyone wants to talk about a lot of people, for instance, want to talk about the fact that slavery was the basis for the Manitoba economy. A lot of people want to talk about the fact that downtown, of course, if you've read the book, you know that downtown is sort of an Indigenous burial ground. Nestawea is the site, the great Indigenous city that was the downtown core. But my favorite piece is the merman piece. And so I'm going to read a little piece from that. So this piece is called Mermaids and Mermen. The movement started in Manitoba's north with a June 7th, 2023 social media post in honor of Pride Month and the premiere of the Disney live-action version of The Little Mermaid. Now you have to forgive my impression, but these are like my cousins who are speaking. So, wish I had a crazy ass friend bro come down to the bank with me and pose in my mermaid tail with my red hair and my bikini top, posted Roanna Ross from Pimachikamak Cree Nation, also known as Cross Lake First Nation. But no one's up for anything. Ross decided to do it herself, dressing up in a red wig, black bra, and pink mermaid tail. She had a friend take a picture of her sunbathing on a rock in Nakau Bay. She posted the shot on social media, the first ever photographed Cree mermaid. Not to be outdone, friends from nearby Norway House Cree Nation posted their own photos, this time as mermen. Suddenly, sightings of Indigenous mermen were everywhere, at Wegasagamak, Garden Hill, and even in Little Grand Rapids. Then came Barons River, Easterville, Poplar River, Blood Vein, Ebb and Flow, and Split Lake. There was a merman sighting in Winipeg, Jay Wood. When I contacted Wood to ask why he dressed up in a blue mermaid tail and a bra adorned with local foliage while posing with a pensive smile on a rock, Wood credited his girlfriend, Trey Flett, who he claimed, quote, persuaded me to do it, to share all the fun and good native humor. I'll be honest, I don't think he needed persuading. There's a wonderful picture, by the way, on page 270 of Johnny Harper and Aquaman Whitney Flett. I could keep listing off mermen. When I started doing research, I found 30. By the time I finished, there were over 60, and the movement had spread outside Manitoba into Ontario and Saskatchewan. There's nothing, I repeat, nothing, like seeing Indigenous men decked out in rainbows of fishtails and bras. So Johnny Harper, the merman of St. Teresa Point, Anishinaabe Cree Nation, or sorry, Nissanoo Nation, posted his own picture as he posed alongside his cousin Whitney Flett, dressed as Aquaman with trident. Humor is a big part of our resilience, and I hope this whole merman thing sends that message. Harper explained to me via email. It has allowed us to connect with each other in so many ways and show everyone that living in an isolated community is not always negative. Indigenous communities competing with one another online is a trend that's been going for some time now, for a long time. From ice jigging to snowdrift diving to reading the TRC report, communities have been challenging one another by posting social media videos for quite some time. Social media challenges between First Nations exploded during the COVID-19 pandemic, which with musical flash mob challenges between community-run check stops. The competitive humor, dance, and joy will welcome relief during a very dark time. Now is a dark time too, with Northern communities enduring some of their worst disasters in history, from youth suicide epidemics, legacies of intergenerational trauma from residential schools, and the impacts from Northern flooding and fires. Part of dealing with these crises, it appears, is mermen. It's really no surprise, though. Mer people are a big part of Indigenous cultures. For Anishinaabeg, they are one of our nation's clan identities and go by the name Nibinabe or Nibinaba or water beings. Being a part of the clan system means they bring knowledge necessary for our laws, governments, and societies to exist. Simply put, Nibinaabeg teach us about the relations between things, ideas, and life. They are very difficult to see, in fact, impossible to view fully, showing only glimpses of themselves and what they know. The knowledge of the Nibinaabeg, therefore, exists in the in-between. Nibinaabeg teach that everything is connected, not only through their unique fused bodies, but also through story. In the great Anishinaabe storyteller Basil Johnson's 1998 book, Mermaids and Medicine Women, Anishinaabeg who are stuck in fundamentalist ways encounter Nibinaabeg and thus discover new parts of themselves in places they never thought to or could explore, like under the water. Nibinaabeg show Anishinaabeg that life must be lived fully, without shame, fear, or constraint. Mermaids and mermen areas and the alternative places as anywhere else. Some might call the teachings of Nibinaabeg queer, two-spirit, or LGBTQ2+, but it's better just to call them fully and absolutely Anishinaabe. Considering this, it's not surprising that in the midst of terrible crises in Indigenous communities, suddenly dozens of mermaids and mermen emerge. In these hilarious photos of proud, beautiful, and colorful Indigenous bodies are messages of inclusivity, positivity, and creativity, building blocks of community. In a world increasingly splitting into political and social divisions, it might just be the sightings of Nibinaabeg and their visions of the in-between that will build communities and save lives. Because after all, that's what mermaids and mermen do. Thanks. That's my favorite piece because I was challenged to do my own merman, which Dennis Ward and I were actually going to go and do it, who's the host of APTN National News. Mm-hmm. And then we thought the world wasn't quite ready for that. And then second is that I love this. I love the whole idea. And I've ended up writing a chapter in another book about mer people in Anishinaabe culture because it's the most brilliant, beautiful, revolutionary part of our storytelling that confronts all the different conflicts and pain and suffering in the world that I think is really beautiful. So,
yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for chatting with us. And I'm so happy to be hosting this book club. I take this opportunity to tell everybody, but for a long time, Niigaan was Mr. Sinclair for me because he was my drama teacher at Kelvin many years ago, and now we're colleagues at the Free Press. So full circle moment.
You somehow made it anyways, despite me being the incompetent drama teacher. But I had a lot of fun teaching in those days, and you're a great student. But clearly gone on to bigger things.
So it's great to talk to you. I've learned so much from you, and I've learned so much through this book. And I love that you picked that column because that was one of my favorites as well, because I think there's obviously a lot of heavy subject matter, a lot of heavy topics, but I think it's important too to show resilience and joy and talk about those pieces as well. So I really appreciate how full this book is. I want to start by asking you specifically about language throughout, because if there's sort of a sub theme that kind of runs through it, it's language and learning so many different words and seeing those words in the newspaper and then in the book. But I think seeing it in the newspaper is really important for people. So talk to me about language, your relationship to language, and why you tend to weave that through your columns.
I just don't know any other way. That's just how I write, because I always try to use as much language as possible in everything that I do, because I was raised in a lodge, in a traditional lodge, where most of our ceremonies are exclusively in the language, and you have to understand portions. And as you grow older, you start to understand more and more of the language. And of course, my problem is stringing the words together into a sentence, but I can muck my way through a number of words that I can make a conversation out of it. My sister, wonderfully, is almost fluent. She dedicated her life to doing it, and so big kudos to her and her incredible work dedicating to saving our language and working to embrace it and work with it. Two things I think that are the most interesting to me about using the language in the newspaper. One is there is a whole host of battles in the print world around the idea of italicizing non-English words.
Mm-hmm.
And because I've always felt uncomfortable about italicizing, because what it does is it makes the word stick out like it's abnormal.
Yeah,
and my job, my goal is to make it normal.
Yeah.
That we just use, like we use Winipek, like we use Indigenous words all the time without italicizing them, like Manitowoc and Winipek and Kanata. Like these are words we use all the time. Canoe, the word canoe. And so my point is that our job is to try to think of things as not abnormal, but normalizing our relationships with each other. And the second is that I've always felt very, very uncomfortable with forcing a translation or a pronunciation guide in my columns, even though I know that people want them. I know people want to know how to say the words. They want to know exactly what the words mean. But the problem with translating is that you could end up writing means all the, like, for instance, my name Niigaan has like 5 different meanings. So it's the sound of the beginning of the day, the sound of light, the sound of lightning. It's the sound of the morning, but also the sound of the future. So which I could write a whole column just in that translating my name. Then the second is that when you put pronunciations in, it starts to become very teacherly like and less readerly like.
Yeah.
And I want to give readers the experience of engaging text. And so sometimes I put them in if I feel that they're really important, like in this column I did. But often I won't put those pronunciation guides in, just because I want the readerly experience to be really central.
Totally. And it kind of interrupts the flow. But I do, in sort of the spirit of not being afraid to make mistakes and just trying things, right? So I remember when people were like, oh, how are we ever going to learn to say Abinogi Mikana? And it's like, just try it. Just try saying it. Like, just don't be afraid. Just try saying it. So I love what you said at the top about land acknowledgements, but I think it applies to Indigenous words that become street names, that become normal when you see them in the newspaper through your columns. Just try saying the words. And I think that is sort of a segue into one of the columns where you're talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and you have the list of names. I really encourage people to revisit that column and to read them out loud. That's how I did it after I read it, because I was finding that I was just reading it and not reading it how I think it was supposed to. And I read them out loud, and man, I will tell you, it hits differently. So this is my segue into asking you about when you're writing about really difficult things, and I know that is often for you, how do you take care of you, and how do you kind of, take care of that mental load and take care of yourself when you're talking about these things?
Well, thanks for pointing out that the say the names piece. The say the names piece is very much, I learned that from other people. They were oftentimes saying, we have to say the names of those who have been left behind or forgotten about, and then, called unfeasible by governments or by police chiefs when their remains are in landfills. one of the things that somebody said to me that they really felt impacted by the audiobook, because oftentimes, I'm sorry, maybe it was glitchy there. Sorry.
But you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes you speed up when you're reading, and if you do the audiobook, which I think is free on certain platforms like Spotify, I read it and they force me to slow down and to read it very paced. And I listened to that, and even I was impacted by my own reading, because I tend to speed up when I'm reading too. And so I agree with what you're saying about reading those pieces. Taking care of myself during hard readings. Well, I mean, if you ask my family, they would say I probably don't do a great job. My daughter particularly is always concerned about me and making sure I eat properly and that I take some time to rest and vacation. But I'll just tell you that I've probably never been more inspired in my life than when I started working for the Free Press. All the jobs that I've had in my career have been fun and wonderful, but they've always killed me in terms of I never saw an outcome of the work that was something that I felt was having impact. Even, when you're a teacher, you don't often see the impact of the work until, 25 years later, and here you are with one of your students who are, who's an accomplished columnist in her own right. And like that's where you start to see as a teacher, oh, well, maybe I did have a tiny little contribution in this person's career. And I never saw that really as a professor either, because you're often teaching these courses that, especially Indigenous credit requirements, that are sometimes people might not always be happy to take. When, there's nothing really like writing a piece and having 150,000 people on a Saturday suddenly have feedback.
Yeah.
And a lot of it quite uncomfortable or comfortable or pleased, seen for the first time. But then also people who maybe have very strong views. I have one guy that's emailed me 582 times. And I know that because I've written 582 columns. And he's told me that he dislikes my column 582 times. And I went to our editor, Paul Samin, and I said, man, what do you do about people who write you horrible things? And he said, how many times has this guy written you? And at the time it was like, I don't know, 112 or 115 times. And I said, and so, yes, so there's one of the most important things is that this guy is an important person. I think he was a reader from the Free Press, very loyal, just wants to express his opinion, and he vociferously reads me.
Yep.
That is quite a response where you see that reconciliation is not about agreeing. It's never been about agreeing. It's about staying in the room together, committing to a relationship, and then sharing space. That's what treaty is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so I see the living embodiment in columns I write all the time. And so I find a great deal of inspiration for that, a lot of joy and happiness. And I think perhaps maybe if I didn't have people in my life who are wonderful and my cat, I probably would find this work very painful. And of course, I don't want to get all sad or anything, but my father and I really bonded, most of all when I became a columnist. He was very proud of the work that I did. And one of the things that I think it brought my father and I together. And so we spent a lot of time laughing together, talking about what we'd write together or what I would write, and he would give me advice. And my favorite story of being a columnist in my whole career is this. And when he moved into an old age home, there was a lot of people who had never heard of the TRC, who are senior citizens. Just for some reason or another, had no interest in it, no engagement. And so, but they are all Free Press subscribers. And so when people had found out that my father, of course, who is a well-known, amazing person, Murray Sinclair, he's head of the TRC, Canadians would know who he is. Nobody knew who he was, but they knew him as Niigaan Sinclair's father, the columnist's father. And so they would all go to him in the morning at breakfast and be like, I have lots to say about this column that your son wrote. And the best thing about it was that he really relished that role of talking with people about the things that I wrote. And that like what a joy it is to talk with my father and just to have him laugh about some of the things together. So I would say that one of the greatest things was spending the last few years with my father was it lifted my heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I understand. It's yeah, as you know, like it can be a very difficult job because there's people that like to email you 500 plus times. And or comments or some of the things you like the part where you were talking about you were receiving comments on a column that you didn't even write. It was just like a topic that like I guess people associated with you and were like, and I have also had that happen to me, so I could relate to that. But we have a bunch of wonderful reader questions, so I want to get to some of them before we run out of time. So the first one is talking about how Winnipeg blends memoir, political critique, and poetry. What inspired you to use a hybrid format, and what did you decide to, or how did you decide what to include or to leave out?
geez, I don't even know. I mean, I guess are people inferring that my writing is poetic? Because I
Yeah.
didn't actually sort of be poetry centered, but thank you, whoever said that. I don't think of myself as a poet, or I am a very bad poet at that. Um, what I would say is that one of the most important things I think as a columnist is that uh, your job is to try to reflect life in the best way possible, and that means being colorful, giving the sense and the sense and the tastes and the looks and the colors, the ways in which we that relationships are always complicated things. And so one of my favorite columns I ever wrote was about the Kekkonen Center, which is a very difficult column to write because it's about the abuse of senior citizens, many of whom are residential school survivors, already having gone through a horrendously difficult experience as a young person, and then in many cases living in poverty because of that experience. And then now in their final years of life, being more mistreated by the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority, being promised that they would be given a place in which they would be honored as elders, and then being left behind and neglected and put into a very dangerous situation. Um, uh, I, I guess what I would just say is that there's a way in which to tell stories that keep the humanity in that, and that's what columnists I hope do. And I'm lucky that some of my favorite columnists were from the Free Press, and some of my favorite work my favorite work is always nonfiction, and so I built my life off of one writer in particular, Richard Wagamese,
Mm.
and I build all of my writing kind of hoping to emulate him in some way.
There was a question specifically about that column, about the center, and just asking if the situation has changed since the publication of the book.
It depends on who you talk to.
Mm.
I would just say that there was some improvements left, and then when the attention came off, there was some neglect that came back, and some legacies that are very complicated and not particularly positive.
I want to, Chris, do you have any questions? I feel like I'm, as usual, monopolizing the conversation.
Well, as you did your reading from the chapter that you chose, I was thinking like the joy in the face of adversity and so on. When I think back to all the book events at the bookstore, for example, with Indigenous authors, and so many hard subjects and so many hard evenings, and yet almost invariably there's so much laughter in them. And one of them, I remember Drew Hayden Taylor was talking to Rosanna Deerchild, and they were talking about there's been a lot of Indigenous publishing in the last 10, 15 on years. That my time in the bookstore, I've seen an amazing burst of Indigenous writing and publishing. And they were I guess, wondering if there's a new generation of authors, Indigenous authors, who get to tell more of the stories of joy and the positive stories, and like maybe some of the work has been done. And so I'm wondering if A, you agree with that, or and B, is there a reflection in the wider society? Are we getting used to, or are we getting better at what we need to be doing, and maybe a little bit more aware of those sides of Indigenous culture that maybe we didn't know about?
I would say there's more Indigenous writing being published by publishing houses, the major ones in particular, than ever before. And that tells you that A, the industry is catching up, and B, that there is a marketability amongst Canada that doesn't see the stories as so off-putting, different, disruptive, challenging, because I think it's all challenging. In fact, you're purchasing more than ever. So I don't know if you caught that last part, but I would say that challenging topics, but those topics are enough that people are still engaging with the issue. Now, I have an issue. I have to just move over here, just over here. They're kicking me out of this area. I will be back in literally 90 seconds.
It's all good. We'll talk amongst ourselves.
I will, if you could just talk amongst yourselves for just a minute. I have to move over there. Thank you. Yeah.
No problem. Did either one of you have a favorite story in this collection?
Good question.
That's hard. There were so many, like every one was like I say, you could have a conversation about every single one. It's like every one is such a revelation and such a learning experience.
I really, this was a question I wanted to ask Niigaan, but I don't know if we'll get time to, but I really like when he gets into creative writing. Something like A Knock on the Door specifically. Yeah, I just really, and again, I think it's because I had him as a drama teacher and he also taught English at Kelvin as well. I never had him as an English teacher, but I had him as a drama teacher. And I know like how much, I mean, obviously we know that he's a great storyteller, but I like when he does little forays into creative writing. And so I'm very curious. I know he already said like his first and main love is nonfiction, but like, I don't know. I'm kind of curious to know if he'd ever write a novel or a short story collection.
Oh yeah, that's a good question for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many.
At the start of every kind of new section, I like that there was like a bit of a longer, kind of very historic focused, fact focused. I mean, everything's factual, but you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like a deep dive into that topic before going into the columns. And I really liked the format of that.
Yeah, like an introduction almost.
Yeah. And I also really enjoyed reading about Roostertown because I live in Roostertown. And we never really learned that much about it in school, despite the fact I went to Grant Park High School, which is like
yeah.
I was going to say, I work on Roostertown.
You do, yeah.
Like that store is right on Roostertown. That was quite a book event that came, and we realized that, and the whole area around it, all the small houses, just I guess north of Grant Park or north of Grant Avenue, across from the store. Yeah, if you wander through that area, you can see. Well, imagine those are the houses that were there when Roostertown was there.
And this is one of the few books that we've done in book club where we had a good number of emails that were from people saying, I don't have a question. I just want to say how important this book is, how much it impacted me. And I have to say, I felt the same way. Like it just is such a reminder of how much stuff we didn't learn and we don't know. And, you know, like it's.
Well, and I don't think I ever miss a column. But seeing them all together really gives a very different picture. When you're reading sort of a column week to week, like you can kind of piece it together, but seeing them all and digesting them all at the same time really gives an incredible survey of work yet to do, work we have done, historical injustices, things that we're still dealing with. Yeah, it just really paints a vivid picture. And there is a reader question about how Niigaan envisions using it in classrooms and community spaces. So I want to ask him that when he gets back, because I think, I think it can do more than a textbook can, right? It's the same reason like a painting can do more than like a giant block of text. Like I think art really helps get people into difficult subjects and maybe things that are, you know, hard to read about or hard to hear about. And he just has a real way of presenting it in a way that's easy to understand. I'm saying a bunch of things about you in your.
We're just talking you up while you're.
How great.
So I apologize. I did a meeting up there yesterday, and I guess because the conference is ending, they're closing everything early. So I apologize.
All good.
It's all good.
Yeah.
I'm good here for another 25, at least for the rest of it anyway. So
Excellent.
Perfect.
Okay, so another reader question I wanted to get to, two actually, but one I also wondered about, so it's both my question and the reader question. But the reader says, one topic I was surprised to see not covered in the book was the issue of pretendians. I thought for sure that the reference to Buffy St. Marie would lead to such a discussion. If possible, I'd be interested in hearing Mr. Sinclair's thoughts on the topic and how he feels about the revelations around St. Marie's heritage.
I don't talk about it at all. No, I guess I don't. So, okay. So two things about this. At the time I had about 400 columns to choose from. And so the publisher helped me select. They've picked about 40 and I picked about 40. So, you could talk about the issue of people who have complicated claims for Indigenous identity all day. And like, where would you begin? Because I've written columns. If you spend time looking up in my columns, I've written probably, I'm going to say at least a dozen columns on different fraudulent cases that have been exposed. Joseph Boyden, Carrie Barassa. I don't want to get into all the, because you'll find that I don't spend a lot of time with that issue, not because I don't care about it, not because I'm not engaged with it. It's because I feel there's bigger issues that I'm focused on, and but I'm currently in the midst of a court case that's involving a person who is suing somebody who alleged that they were from they were not Indigenous. And so some of the emails that I've traded with a certain researcher have been brought up in a court case. And so this comes with some very real impacts. In fact, if my Erin is a amazing editor for my newsletter, and so I encourage everybody to get a free newsletter every week. You can get Erin, Jen's, Paul has one, Dan has one. Like there's some really wonderful newsletters we produce, and they're free. But the piece that I wrote today or coming out tomorrow or Thursday is it's called Badjamoan, which is the news. And one of the 5 stories that I talk about is the recent issue involving people suing other people for alleging that they have fraudulent claims to identity. I'll just say that I talk about it. In terms of Buffy St. Marie, I'll tell you this. Was I upset? Yes. Was I concerned about it? Do I believe that Jeff Leo, who exposed the story from CBC, I think many of those claims seem to have a lot of weight and a lot of merit. I do know, however, the Piapot family who adopted Buffy St. Marie, and they vociferously claim that she has Indigenous heritage. And so I do have close relationships with the family that adopted her. But all of that, none of that takes away from being a 6-year-old boy turning on Sesame Street in my dad's first floor of our house, which was a law firm. And my dad's way of taking care of me during the day was plopping me in front of Sesame Street, Electric Company, all the different shows, Hercules. Like I watched all those shows vociferously. And seeing Buffy St. Marie on Sesame Street, even though I know she was dressing up, or even if she wasn't Indigenous, like it still impacted me seeing an Indigenous person on television. And one of the most impactful things that I do speak about is when Shingoose died, which is Curtis Johnny, whose name is his stage name is Shingoose. I did an honoring of him. She was part of that show. And part of being Indigenous is having relations with Indigenous peoples, and enough that they stand up for you. Curtis Johnny, Charlie Hill, these are heroes of mine. And they stood up for Tom Jackson. They stood up for Buffy St. Marie. Now, maybe they didn't know, maybe they did know, maybe whatever. But Max Gale, who's from Barney Miller, was a non-Indigenous person who was a part of that show too. And what they were doing was they were talking about pride and Indigenous identity, or what was called Indian time. And you can't take away from those experiences and how important they were to be creating the person that you see in front of you.
I'm just making sure that I get to everybody's questions. The book confronts the layered histories of Winnipeg. What has been the most surprising or moving reaction you've received from local readers?
There was a group, and I won't say who it is, but when I uncovered that the downtown core of Winnipeg is the former site of Nestawaya, that wasn't just myself. It was also with Jerry Friesen, who's a historian. When we broke that story, it flipped the conversation about downtown. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs put out press releases. The Forks changed their approach completely on engaging with history and archaeology in the downtown. And there was one organization that freaked out, lawyered up right away, and didn't know what to do with that column, because part of that, and you can probably read that column to know who I might be speaking about there. They had a lot of concerns that their area was going to be closed down, and their business was going to, well, not really a business, but their area was going to be shut off to the public, that we're suddenly going to bust up the corner of Broadway and Main and then just dig up all like I don't know what they thought, but I can tell you that, that was that was the most interesting response. But the second most interesting response was when I wrote about the piece in Brandon about the RV park on top of the former cemetery of the residential school there. Not only did our colleagues at the Brandon Sun freak out and do an entire one-page set of columns, articles saying that Niigaan Sinclair is the worst person possible for talking about this. This was our colleagues at the Brandon Sun who did this. Second is that it also, the city of Brandon was very angry that I would expose the story. And so they said that I ruined the relationships, or because I talked about this publicly. Well, the fact is that it needed to be spoken about publicly. And I was like number 8 that was talking about it. It just had, I happened to have a column. People had been writing about this and everywhere else. In fact, Chiefs were speaking about it. There was an entire Globe and Mail piece about this. But, people suddenly saw the Winnipeg Free Press as exposing the story, and particularly an Indigenous person. And it was all hands on deck to attack them.
Yeah, it's that's how I think, though, that you have struck something that needed to be said. When the reaction is like that, it's like, okay, this is because this needed to be said and needed to be done.
Similar with the Kekkonen Center. The Kekkonen Center piece got a lot of people very angry at me from the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. I will tell you that I wasn't very long on a board because of that column.
This is a good question too. Well, they've all been great questions. Kudos to the readers for asking great questions. But obviously you do a lot of talks. You're around a lot of people. You have your column, but you also have a lot of different platforms. So this question is, how do you envision Winnipeg being used in classrooms or community spaces?
I've always thought that some of the pieces would make really good graphic stories, and so there is a movement to produce a few of the columns into some graphic stories, like mini comic books, or there's a really great school in Quebec that translated the piece and then performed it.
Cool.
That's the piece, the Knock on the Door piece.
I love that one. I actually have a question about that one after.
And another very popular piece is The Biker. Because I had so many groups of teachers that wanted that piece written down, because I would do that as a performance piece in front of groups of teachers to say, what would it be like if somebody stole your bike, and then apologized and said you could have it for one day next year. And it's, obviously the whole thing's about land, and, imagining what it's like to have somebody say sorry and then not act differently. And so, and it was, talking about the apology for residential schools, but also about recognizing land theft. Anyways, so that piece has been turned into a number of short little reading pieces for students that's been turned into YouTube. And so all of those different pieces, I think, there's a really beautiful art project in Toronto at the North York Community House based on the Say the Names piece.
Okay.
And they created a whole art exhibit from the Say the Names piece, which was very inspirational.
Amazing.
I'm trying to think of there was I got a really interesting response from the Hudson Bay Company on talking about their history of slavery, and really wanting me to make sure that I understand that slavery is not in the mandate of the Hudson Bay Company. Anyways, so I guess I was starting to talk about responses to the pieces. You asked about classrooms. There's been never any teacher's guide from, but I would love to see someone creating lesson plans from it. And if you're willing to share some of those, I know there are many class sets, about 20 or so classes in Winnipeg that are now adopting this as their course text in grade 9, 10, and 11. I just came from Yellowknife, where all of the grade 5 students this year in Yellowknife read the Northern Lights piece.
Oh, nice.
So about the grandmother on the bus talking about the Northern Lights, because of course their relationship with the Northern Lights is very intimate, and they all study the Northern Lights as part of their science unit. So I went to all the grade 5 classes in Yellowknife, which there's like 7 of them. And I went to all the different groups and met with all the students, and they all gave me gifts at the end, which were all like really beautiful t-shirts from Yellowknife. So those kinds of things.
That's really nice.
So I would just say that there's, it's used a lot in classrooms. There isn't a teacher's guide, but there is lots of innovative teachers out there that are doing that work. My little offer to everybody, although maybe it's right now is not there's 20 classes I can handle it. Maybe if there's more, then I can't. But whenever I hear about it, I always want to talk to the students and find out what they like about the book and what is it that they want to hear more of. And and I'm very happy to Zoom into classes.
Well, maybe we'll recruit you for our media literacy program at the Free Press, and you can get involved that way.
We never, as you can tell with all the things I do at the Free Press, I don't say no a lot.
I just want to be mindful of time because Niigaan does have a flight to catch. So if you want to do final questions, one each for Jen and Chris, and then we will wrap it up.
Chris, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'm going to grab one of the reader questions. As you said, they made it easy on us today. What advice would you give young Indigenous writers trying to tell their stories today?
So I'm on many juries these days. So one of the things is because I had the honor of winning the Governor General Award, it puts you in a lot of other places and a lot of juries, I was in the Blue Met Festival. I was on stage with Salman Rushdie just a couple weeks ago, which I never thought that would ever happen in my career, that I'd be hanging out with Salman Rushdie, and gave him a copy of the book. And he told me, and then we talked about his first book. I don't know if you know, but he wrote a lot about Indigenous peoples in North America in his very first book. So anyways, my point of it is that I am on a lot of things where I read a lot of things and I meet a lot of writers. And I can tell you that the number one thing, writers, is the same story for every writer, which is that somebody somewhere somehow told somebody they can't write about something in a certain way at a certain time, and that writer proved them wrong. So if you have a vision, if you have a way that you want to do it, if you have a dream that you want to tell a story in a certain way, I've read a book about all texts, like all written through text between people and friends sitting in the COVID-19 pandemic. I've read a book which has one part prose, one part art, one part comic book, one part, there was a CD that came with it. Like, you can do anything. You will find an audience. The question is that you always have to do 2 of 3 things. And this is the Gregory Kamichik, who is one of my very close friends, GMB Kamichik, if he's, well, I think we all know him, graphic novelist in Winnipeg. His advice to writers is, and I use this as my life mantra, you have to be excellent, flexible, or meet a deadline. You have to do 2 of those 3 things at all times with all of your writing. You can be excellent and meet a deadline and not be easy to work with. You can be excellent and flexible and miss all your deadlines. You can meet your deadlines and be flexible and not always be excellent. And that's pretty much how I've lived my life. Some columns I write are amazing. Some columns I write are terrible. Some I'm really proud of, some I'm not proud of, but I always try to be 2 of those 3 things. And one of them, proud to say, is usually the deadline is one of the 3. Well, although Erin might argue with you.
And you were sort of getting into this before you got interrupted there about publishing and about an audience, that there is a big audience waiting for more stories like this. We sell a lot of Indigenous writers' books, and publishers are becoming more and more aware of this. So
Yeah,
that
I don't know if I don't know if the answer came clear. I just what I said beforehand was that the explosion of Indigenous writing is like two things. But I wrote about this in a column just recently about the TP in IKEA. You know what a TP in IKEA proves to you? Two things. One is there's enough Indigenous peoples who are doing enough things that there's then a market for it. So clearly there's enough Indigenous peoples who are middle class purchasing things at IKEA that IKEA sees a market there. Second is there's enough Winnipeggers, Manitobans, who see that Indigenous peoples as a part of their shopping experience isn't disruptive. It's just going to the store.
Mhm.
It's just living your life. And the most remarkable thing about that experience is that when you work with Indigenous peoples, you get profound visions you've never seen before. This is for writing a book or going to IKEA, which is that you see healthy images of Indigenous families in the cases that are those furniture that you can go and buy, but you get to see portraits of Indigenous families that inside of an Indigenous life that you might otherwise not get to see. And that's what a book or going to the display at a department store.
Hmm.
Do you have time for one more, Erin?
If it's a quick one, yes.
Okay. Very quick one. We've talked about your favorite pieces. Were there any that stand out to you as being the most difficult or the ones that surprised you? Because I find sometimes when I start writing, what ends up happening is a lot different than what I set out to do. So I'm just wondering if you've ever had that experience where you've had, something just change in the writing or any columns that you've written that surprised you or that were difficult.
I'm one of the hardest pieces I wrote were about the deaths of young people. Because they were very emotional. I had to get to know the families. And the hardest piece I've ever written was going to Kelly Fraser's family. They weren't willing to talk to anybody but myself because I knew Kelly, I knew her family. Her and I had been on stage many times together. And when her life ended very tragically, that was one of the worst. Ruth Bonneville, our photographer, came with me, and I realized how incredible Ruth Bonneville is to be able to create safe situations for families in the most craziest of moments, darkest of moments, and still create, a really sense of beauty in her photography. And second is that I didn't know what I was going to write about when I wrote about. Like I just knew that they wanted to talk to me, and they were willing to talk to me, and it was literally just 48 hours after she passed.
Yeah.
And what a responsibility that was. And I didn't know how to write about it because they also didn't want certain details and released. And I had to make a decision of, do I accept having the story limited? And luckily, I think the story turned out better than I had hoped. So I think there's a funny balance that you have to try to play in which you've got a lot of difficult situations. And we particularly went through a difficult experience at the Free Press. I'm not afraid to talk about it. When we published Grand Chief Merrick's death, which I've had lots of different opinions on, and I think that we have to show sensitivity. We have to be more responsible, and we have to learn from that experience. And we learn from all experiences at the newspaper. And so I think that that's a story that's still being written in our relationship with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. And it's going in directions that we otherwise might not expect. And I could keep talking about that all day, but there's one other piece that sticks out in my mind. It's writing about Wab Kinu's name. Like I was supposed to write about the new premier.
Yeah.
And so our editor, Paul Simin, said, "Hey, can you write about the new premier? Because you've known him for such a long time." Our parents were friends, so I've known him since he's been a kid, and I was a kid myself. So I started writing a piece about his political legacy, and then I started writing about his name.
Yeah.
So Wabonaquit. And I ended up writing 800 words just on that word, just on like what that word means and his clan. And the fact that he's Lynx clan, and Lynx clans always go into foreign territories first and check out things so that other people can find the safety. I was like, this is so perfect.
Yeah,
And
no, I love that one too. Like it just, yeah, it just goes to show that sometimes when you take a different path, it is rewarding.
or sometimes the writing tells you how it's going to go.
Yes,
Like
that is true.
that's the best experience for me. The best pieces I've ever written are the pieces in which I plan to do something and the writing goes, nah, you got to write about this other thing.
Yeah,
And then you end up doing that and it's way better.
absolutely.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end things for this evening. Thank you so much, Niigaan, for joining us and making time for us. And Jen and Chris, thank you so much for your hosting and everyone for your questions. I can't really think of a better way to honor National Indigenous History Month than by diving into this book. So thank you everyone who read it. I just want to make a quick mention of the summer pick is The Riveter by Jack Wang. It's a wonderful historical fiction, great summer read. We don't meet in July, so we're going to meet for this in August. You'll get an email with all that information tomorrow morning. And that's it for us this month. Again, thank you to Jen and Chris and Niigaan, and we will see you all again in August. Bye, everybody.